I had a gut feeling that my wife was secretly preparing to divorce me, so I took precautions and protected my assets just in case. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, she officially filed, only to realize too late that her plan had completely backfired. Now she's desperately trying to undo everything, but I'm not falling for it. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's video, I need a quick favor. Lately, I've noticed the channel losing some steam, and one of the best ways you can help is by subscribing. It's fast, free, and it lets us keep creating great content. Your support means the world to us. Let's grow this community together. Thanks a ton. Alright, let's get into the story. I've been browsing through posts for a while, convinced I'd never have a personal tale to share. But life has a funny way of surprising you, and for months I've been carrying a secret that I now have to unload. Let me be clear, I'm not one to jump to conclusions or expect the worst. My wife, let's call her M, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 4. Things were rock solid, or so I believed. We experienced the usual ups and downs, but nothing ever made me suspect trouble. For most of our time together, we were that picture-perfect couple. We laughed over silly inside jokes, debated for hours on which movie to watch, and just had a rhythm that worked. She'd plan these amazing date nights, and I'd surprise her with her favorite takeout after a long day. It all felt effortless, as if we'd finally mastered the art of love. That's why what happened next hit me like a ton of bricks. About 6 months ago, I began noticing subtle changes. At first, they were tiny details that you might miss if you weren't looking closely. Suddenly, she started carrying her phone everywhere, even if she was just heading to the kitchen or folding laundry. Before, her phone would sit on the coffee table for hours, and no one minded. One day, I joked, "Are you running a secret spy operation or something?" She laughed and said, "No, it's just that work emails have been crazy lately." I brushed it off, but then a few days later, she set up a new password, a password I'd never seen before. When I casually asked about it, she offered a vague explanation about security and hackers. I didn't push further because I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something felt off. It didn't stop there. She started taking calls in other rooms, a behavior she'd never had before. It wasn't exactly subtle either. Her phone would ring, and she'd say, "Hold on, I need to take this," before disappearing into the bedroom or stepping out onto the porch. If I asked who was calling, she'd just say it was a coworker. Then I noticed another new habit. She would suddenly keep her face down on the table. I hadn't seen that before until one day when I reached over to hand her something, and she quickly slid her phone away. It was a blink and you miss it moment, but it stayed with me. The changes weren't limited to her phone use. Our conversations began to lose their spark. Topics that once flowed easily, like planning our anniversary or saving up for a new car, turned into awkward exchanges. She'd simply nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," then switch topics abruptly. Everything came together one ordinary Wednesday. She mentioned that she was meeting a friend for coffee after work. It didn't sound unusual because she did that from time to time. I happened to be running errands nearby, so I thought surprising her would be sweet. But when I got to the cafe, she wasn't with her friend at all. Instead, I saw her pacing outside, phone pressed to her ear. I stayed in my car because something in her tone sounded serious. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I caught bits like "It's almost ready and we're starting fresh soon." My stomach dropped. I couldn't catch every word, but it didn't sound like a casual work chat or friendly catch-up. It felt like she was planning something major. When she got home, I asked casually how her coffee run went. She launched into an elaborate story about her friend complaining about her boyfriend. That unexpected comment left me staring at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. She just shrugged and said, "I just think we should have all our account info, passwords, documents, everything, in one place for emergencies." I was taken aback. We had never discussed anything like that before, and given everything I'd noticed, the timing was strange. I tried to keep my tone light as I asked, "What kind of emergencies?" She shrugged again, replying, "Just in case something happens to one of us or if we need to make a quick big financial decision." On the surface, her logic made sense, but the way she delivered it felt too rehearsed, as if she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to bring it up. I mumbled, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense," but inside, alarms were going off. Why now? Why are we suddenly talking about merging our finances when we've always kept them separate? That night, her words played over and over in my mind. Was this just normal adult caution, or was I overthinking things? Then I recalled the secretive phone calls, the hushed conversation at the cafe, and how distant she'd become. All these little clues began to add up, and the picture wasn't one I liked. A few days later, while I was making a sandwich in the kitchen, she was scrolling through her phone and asked, "Have you thought more about organizing our bank stuff? Do you know where all our account details are?" I lowered my knife and turned to her, saying, "Okay, what's going on? You've been bringing up finances a lot lately. Is there something we need to discuss?" She looked up, clearly surprised that I'd pressed her on it. "No, nothing's wrong," she said quickly, almost making me laugh. "I just think it's important," she continued. "You know, for emergencies." I pressed, "Emergencies like what?" All she did was shrug, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, just life stuff. It's not a big deal, I promise. I just think we should be prepared." Her answer was so vague that it only deepened my concerns. I nodded and said, "Okay, let's move on," but the way she dodged a straight answer only made my suspicions grow. It wasn't just a casual remark anymore, it felt like she was hiding something. With no clear idea of what that could be, I decided to dig into our finances the next day while she was at work. Logging into our joint account online, I found something unexpected. Over the past month, there had been several small transactions, not big sums, just minor withdrawals that didn't match our usual bills, groceries, or other expenses. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, yet it seemed she had been taking money for reasons I couldn't figure out. I thought about confronting her, but something told me to hold off. If I was wrong, I'd look foolish, and if I was right, I needed to be cautious. The worry gnawed at me, so I reached out to an old college friend who's now a lawyer. I explained what I discovered, careful not to sound like a conspiracy theorist. "I'm not saying something's definitely wrong, but you're not crazy for wanting to be prepared. If you're worried about protecting your assets, now's the time, better safe than sorry," he said, guiding me through simple steps to secure my finances. Taking such drastic measures felt surreal. It was like bracing for something terrible, even though I didn't know exactly what was amiss. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If she was really up to something, and I was starting to suspect she was, I had to protect myself. It wasn't just about the money or assets, it was about the life we had built together. I kept replaying memories, our wedding day, late-night chats about our dreams, and even our quirky inside jokes. How had we come to this? The thought of taking these steps felt like admitting defeat, like I was giving up on the trust we once shared. That evening, while she was out, I sat at my desk with my laptop. My hands trembled as I began reviewing our bank accounts, investment statements, and even the property deed. Every document felt like a betrayal, yet a persistent inner voice reminded me that this was about survival, not sabotage. I never intended to hurt her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act now, I'd regret it later. I put together a list of everything I could transfer quietly, without alerting anyone. As I typed, a heavy weight settled in my chest. I had trusted her completely for years, and now I was defending myself against the one person I assumed would always be there for me. I then called my mom and asked her to keep some things safe for a while. I didn't go into details. "I need you to hold on to a few things for me, okay? It's just a precaution," I explained. There was a pause, and I could hear the worry in her voice as she asked if I was all right. "Yeah, I'm fine, just taking some extra steps to be safe," I lied. Though she didn't push further, her hesitation was clear. Hanging up, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I hated pulling her into this mess, but having her help gave me some stability in the chaos. By the time she returned home, I'd already started moving my assets, our cash, investments, and even the house title, into my mom's name. I left just enough in our joint account to keep up appearances while securing the rest. She never noticed a thing. When she walked in, she kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. Outwardly, I seemed normal, but inside I was a wreck. Part of me felt terrible, as if I had betrayed her trust, yet another part felt relieved. Finally, I was taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of hand. Over the next 3 days, I tried to stick to our usual routine. I didn't want her to sense that anything was off. She even seemed unusually cheerful at times, which only added to my suspicions. If she was planning something, she was excellent at hiding it. What struck me most was that she never mentioned the finances again, not even when I had brought it up before. It was as if the subject had vanished from her memory. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting, and she dismissed it as unimportant. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed she was deliberately avoiding the topic. After I pressed her a bit, I noticed her glancing at me now and then, as if she were checking my mood or debating whether to speak. Each time, she'd quickly shift her focus back to her phone, the TV, or a book. It was subtle, but unmistakable. She seemed to be waiting for me to mention it, as if she didn't want to force the issue. The silence only heightened my anxiety. It wasn't like her to drop something she considered important, and her evasiveness now felt intentional. Whether she was testing the waters or waiting for a cue, I wasn't about to give her any reason to push forward. Whatever she planned next, I knew I had to stay one step ahead. That night, I made sure everything was locked in. I reviewed all the paperwork again, double-checking every detail of my mom's asset transfers, the house, savings, investments, all legally in her name and sealed in an uncontested trust. I even called her to confirm she had all the necessary documents. 2 weeks passed, and everything appeared normal. In fact, she began acting more affectionate, even talking about random things like work or what we should have for dinner. It threw me off, since she'd been so distant for months, keeping conversations superficial. I started to wonder if I'd overreacted, that maybe her odd behavior was just stress or something I couldn't quite understand. Then, one Friday night, she sat me down on the couch, turned off the TV, and said, "We need to talk." My stomach dropped immediately. I already knew what she was about to say. Before she even finished, she said, "I think we should get a divorce," in a tone so calm it felt rehearsed. There was no anger, no raw emotion, just a cool detachment, as if she were mentioning we'd simply run out of milk. I stared at her, unsure how to respond while she listed her reasons. She explained that she needed space, a chance to figure herself out, and that she'd lost her identity in our marriage. It was the usual breakup talk that never really clarified anything. Then she added something that shifted everything. "You know, I've made countless sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you appreciate them. I deserve more." That last part cut deep. It wasn't merely about ending things. It was as if she was insisting I owed her, placing all the blame on me while claiming what was rightfully hers. As I tried to process her words, a new question formed: why now? She mentioned a friend who had been helping her see things clearly, all while avoiding eye contact with me. I listened silently, my mind racing with questions. Who was this friend? Why were they so influential in our marriage? It wasn't a casual comment. It felt like someone had been encouraging her, making leaving seem less like a choice and more like a calculated move. The more she spoke about her sacrifices, the more I doubted what she meant by sacrifices. What exactly had she sacrificed? I recalled how I'd always supported her dreams, moving closer to her job even if it meant a longer commute, budgeting for an expensive yoga retreat, backing her career changes, and even planning vacations around her wishes. I wasn't some distant partner. I showed up, remembered birthdays, and even offered ideas when she complained about feeling stuck. And yet, her "I deserve more" line stung all the more. It wasn't that she was upset about something I'd done wrong. She was upset because the person I once knew was gone. I wasn't about to let her redefine our story to match her new reality. Instead of pushing back, I simply nodded and said, "If that's how you feel, I guess we need to figure out the next steps." Her surprise at my calmness only deepened my curiosity about the force behind her sudden change. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. There was something more, and I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Soon after that conversation, she moved into her own apartment, and on Monday, I received the divorce papers. And let me tell you, they weren't just about ending the relationship. She planned to take half the house, my savings, my assets, and even the car, plus spurious spousal support clauses that made little sense given her high salary. It felt as though she expected me to hand over everything I'd ever worked for. At first, I thought it was just revenge, but the precision and aggression of her demands confirmed that someone was guiding her every step. I couldn't just ask her directly who she was talking to, so I turned to social media. She hadn't blocked me, and though she rarely posted, I combed through her tagged photos and comments looking for clues. That's when I noticed a pattern. A guy named Jake was constantly liking and commenting on her posts. Nothing overtly scandalous, but enough to make me pause. I clicked on his profile. It showed him as a 30-year-old marketing professional, nothing extraordinary at first glance. Yet as I scrolled, I found a photo of him at the same cafe where I had seen her just weeks before, on the same day she had been talking about starting fresh. My gut churned as I discovered more subtle hints, a comment on one of her pictures saying "you've got this," and even a selfie he posted from what looked like her new residence. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to raise my suspicions. Not one to sit idle, I knew I had to act. That comment about a friend who helped her made me desperate for answers. I reached out to Lisa, a mutual friend who had known my wife for years. I kept it casual, asking if she'd noticed anything off lately. Lisa quickly brushed it off, claiming she had no idea about any new friend or unusual behavior. I pressed a bit more, but she ended the conversation abruptly. Unwilling to back down, I called another friend, Emily, explaining I just needed to understand what was going on. She was vague at first, and when I asked more, she suddenly hung up, leaving me even more unsettled. Then, out of the blue, Emily called back. After a long pause, she hesitated before finally saying that my wife had been spending a lot of time with someone named Jake, a coworker, apparently. Emily admitted she didn't know many details, but mentioned that Jake was also involved in the divorce advice my wife was receiving. Hearing his name made everything start to fall into place. It was clear that her need for space or self-discovery wasn't the whole story. Someone else was orchestrating her decisions, and I was determined to find out why. That Saturday, I parked a block away from her apartment building, determined to confirm my suspicions. A few hours later, I saw her and Jake exit the building together. They didn't hold hands, but the way they walked, close, whispering to each other, said enough. They got into his car and drove off, leaving me sitting there, staring at the spot where they had just been. I never followed her rules, I didn't need to. It soon became clear that she hadn't just stopped loving me, she'd been planning to leave with someone else all along. Suddenly, every odd detail clicked into place, the unexpected cold distance, the probing money questions, the harsh demands, and those divorce papers. She wasn't simply walking away, she was stripping me of everything, always seen with someone new. That night, I went home with my mind spinning from everything I'd discovered. The sting of betrayal cut deep, but what hurt most was how meticulously planned it all was. She was using the divorce as a stepping stone to a new life with Jake, completely unaware of the plan I had set in motion for her. The first mediation session was tense from the moment we walked in. Her lawyer arrived with a binder so heavy it seemed as if he were representing a Fortune 500 company. He began listing her demands as if they were perfectly fair: half the house, all my money and assets, the car, and even a few absurd requests for spousal support. I sat silently, nodding along while waiting for my attorney to make his move. When it was finally our turn, my lawyer slid a stack of documents across the table and said, "Before we proceed, let's all review these." Her lawyer grabbed the papers and started skimming through them. His confident posture evaporated quickly with each page he flipped, his brow furrowed deeper. "What is this?" he demanded, staring at my lawyer. The documents revealed that every major asset had been transferred into a trust under my mother's name. My lawyer calmly explained that the transfers were completed several weeks before she filed for divorce, and that the trust was completely legal and irrevocable. The room fell into a heavy silence. Her lawyer looked at her, confusion and frustration written all over his face. "You didn't mention this," he stated flatly. In an abrupt move, she snatched the papers from his hands and flipped through them herself. Her face turned red as she muttered, "This can't be real," staring at the notarized signatures and dates. Then she turned to me, her expression shifting from disbelief to outright rage. "You planned this," she accused, as if I'd committed a terrible crime. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up just to screw me over." I said nothing, I just let her connect the dots on her own. Growing agitated, her lawyer urged my counsel to explain further. Slowly and deliberately, my lawyer laid out every piece of evidence needed to prove the transfers beyond doubt. The dates aligned perfectly, showing I had moved everything well before she filed. The signatures were properly notarized, and the evidence was rock solid. Nothing they could do would change that. Furious, she leaned forward. "You're unbelievable," she spat. "I can't believe you'd do something like this to me." I remained silent, there was nothing left to say. This wasn't about hurting her, it was about defending myself because she had made it clear she wouldn't go down without a fight. As the session ended, her lawyer mumbled something about rethinking their strategy, but everyone in the room knew they were out of moves. After we left the building, she pulled me aside in the hallway, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," she said in a low, threatening tone. "You're going to regret this." I simply replied, "I already regret trusting you." That was the only regret I had. Everything escalated far quicker than I'd expected after mediation. Almost immediately, she went into full meltdown mode. It started with endless phone calls. At first, her voicemails sounded calm, even remorseful, as she said things like, "I think we need to talk," or "I know things got messy, but we can fix it." I ignored them. By the next day, her messages swung wildly between sobbing and screaming. One message would have her apologizing for making a mistake and begging not to lose what we had built together, and the next would see her launching into a furious tirade, calling me stingy and cruel, blaming me for every problem in her life. I ignored it all. My lawyer had warned me not to engage, and honestly, I was done playing her games. But she wasn't finished. When calls and texts went unanswered, she began spinning stories. Mutual friends later told me that she had been telling everyone the divorce was a hoax, a giant prank. I mean, who would believe that? The holes in her story quickly became obvious. Friends started asking, if it's just a joke, why file real legal papers? Why hire a lawyer and make such specific demands? When no one bought her excuse immediately, she doubled down. She claimed it wasn't a joke but a test of our relationship's strength, casting herself as the victim. According to her, my reaction had hurt and betrayed her, crossing a line that shattered the trust in our marriage. Some people initially believed her version. I even got emails and comments like, "I had no idea things were so bad for you." Even her own brother lashed out, saying, "You should have just talked it out instead of being so drastic." It was annoying, but I knew the truth would eventually come out. And it did, thanks to a mutual friend, let's call him Matt. Matt and I weren't particularly close, but we'd always been on friendly terms. A few weeks after mediation, he messaged me unexpectedly, saying he had something important to share. When we met, he pulled out his phone and showed me a string of texts between her and Jake. I was puzzled and asked, "How did you even get these?" as I scrolled through the messages. Matt explained that he and Jake had a mutual friend who had overheard their conversations. This friend had become worried about how things were unfolding, especially when Jake started bragging about securing her future. It soon became clear that by securing her future, he meant draining me dry. Feeling terrible for keeping quiet, that friend took screenshots and sent them to Matt, thinking he could warn me since he was closer to me. Matt shook his head and said, "This guy's been playing both sides. He's been egging her on to take everything from you while convincing her he'd always be there for her." He handed me the texts and added, "I thought you should know, you don't deserve this man." The messages were shocking. She wasn't just ranting about the divorce, she was actively planning her next moves with Jake, and he was guiding her every step. One message read, "Once the settlement is finalized, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree to our terms." Jake replied, "Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to, he owes you. We'll start fresh once you get the money." I sat there, staring at the phone, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an emotional reaction to a failed marriage, it was calculated, cold manipulation. After I thanked Matt and he left, my mind raced. Everything fell into place, her sudden withdrawal, her obsession with our money, and her harsh demands during the divorce were all part of a secret plan she had developed with Jake behind the scenes. Soon, those texts spread among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few people, and the news spread quickly. Her story lost all credibility almost overnight. People who were once indifferent or even supportive began to distance themselves, and even those who had defended her before now saw her true colors. By the time the divorce was finalized, she was left with only her personal belongings. Her lawyer quietly dismissed her complaint when it became clear there was no legal basis for her claims. All of her bold demands crumbled under the weight of the documents I had produced, and the trust one had built with my mother remained unbreakable. Jake seemed to vanish as soon as things started to fall apart. I wouldn't be surprised if he used her as much as she used me. From what I gathered, he had been fueling her dreams of independence and a fresh start, but when it became obvious she wasn't getting anything, he was gone. Without Jake in her corner, her confidence fell apart. The calls and texts kept coming, but they grew more desperate. She stopped blaming me and instead pleaded, "Can we please talk? I'll do anything to fix this." One voicemail said, "You don't have to forgive me, but can we settle this and move on? I'll drop everything if you just talk to me." I couldn't respond, it was too late to undo the damage. Even her family started to pull away. At one point, her brother reached out to apologize for things he had said when he believed her side of the story. "I didn't realize what she was doing to you," he said. "I'm sorry I ever took her word for it. As for me, I ended up with the house, my savings, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace of mind. My mother, as always, was my rock. She arrived with buckets of paint and a list of ideas to help me reclaim my space. Now, I feel like life is truly mine again, no more second-guessing every little interaction or feeling betrayed. Just peace. She's a chapter in my past that I no longer read, and the rest of my story is mine to write. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.